People talk a lot about a civil war among Americans in general between the right and the left. But what is becoming more and more evident is that there is a toxic cocktail between radical economic politics and identity politics that is tearing apart the Democratic Party. And I would say that in certain ways, the radical economic politics sometimes clash with the identity politics. And one of the best exhibits of this is the campaign of Kamala Harris, who already did a campaign profile of her, candidate profile. And I have to say that she is one of the candidates that I hope to God never becomes president, because if she does, your civil liberties will be violated. It doesn't matter what group you belong to, whether men or women or black or Latino or white, whatever. She is basically a person who is out there in order to police society. Okay? So, Luther Campbell, who is, I guess, known as Uncle Luke, a former rapper from Two Live Crew, writes a column nowadays for the Miami New Times. And he wrote, Kamala Harris can't count on the black vote in 2020. So Campbell is pretty far, he's very far to the left. And I've heard this from people all over the spectrum in the black community, people who are pro-blacks, people who are conservatives, people who are far left progressive like Jamarl Thomas. There are a lot of people on the left who can't stand her and who could possibly vote for somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, who's she's just I think she's Pacific Islander. So that, I think, is, it's really a step forward in America. Now, a lot of people who would vote for Kamala Harris happen to be white, or they happen to be other ethnic groups. They just happen to be very liberal. I have no problem with people voting for Kamala Harris. I would just say, I hope you don't. That's the way I would put it. So he writes, Kamala Harris will have trouble persuading black voters to make her president in 2020. First, the U.S. Senator from California must explain why Donald Trump has a better prison reform record than she had as the Golden State's Attorney General. So those are shots fired, because I've read a couple pieces by Luther Campbell, and he is not a fan at all of Donald Trump. Then she'll have to overcome the perception she'll do anything to climb to the top. That is likely a reference to her banging the mayor of San Francisco. On the street, many blue-collar African Americans, especially men, have already made up their minds not to vote for her. Between 2004 and 2016, when Harris worked as San Francisco's district attorney and state attorney general, she supported legislation that sent kids who skipped school to jail, and she opposed federal supervision of California's prisons after a U.S. Supreme Court ruling declared the overcrowded facilities inflicted cruel and unusual punishment on inmates. When she appealed a court order to implement new parole programs, Harris cited the need to use prisoners as slave labor to fight wildfires and pick up highway trash. So that's kind of an exaggeration, but it's not much of an exaggeration. Kamala Harris did write, I believe, a memo that she felt that these prisoners provided kind of a low wage, revenue saving source of labor for the state. So yes, if you want to take it as slave labor, you can, but it's not exactly the same thing. The black voters want politicians who will put away thugs and killers terrorizing the neighborhood. They don't support those who deny defendants rehabilitation and send them to prison for crimes they didn't commit to line private prison companies' pockets. So I think he's kind of mixing several problems. There are a lot of people who dispute the value of private prisons. Now, I saw Candace Owens toured one, and she kind of said it's a great, they're working great or whatever. I would suspect that there's plenty of private prisons that are horrible. So the other problem is that in many cases the public prisons are worse than the private prisons. So I think the real issue here is how to prevent people from committing more crimes. That way, we'll just have less people in prison, whether it's private or public. That's really the key here. So Harris rose to prominence in California after an affair with married but separated former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, who recently wrote a column that mentioned their relationship. Brown said he influenced Harris' career by appointing her to 2 state commissions when he was California Assembly Speaker. He also helped her in her first race for San Francisco District Attorney. When Harris, whose mother is from India and father is from Jamaica, decided it was time to take her talents to Washington, D.C., she married Douglas Emhoff, a rich white lawyer. For better or worse, black men don't want to vote for a black woman who married a white man or was the mistress of a powerful black man. So I think that is, I don't know if that's fair or not fair, because they do have a point, but I don't think I think that's kind of a side issue here. But Kamala Harris, if you think about it, if you do believe in women's equality, which you don't have to, but if you do, women should be able to marry whoever they want. If they want to have casual sexual relationships, I guess that's okay. But the accusation that she used it to get ahead, that's the problem. And a lot of people, not just black guys and not just dudes in general, don't like it when a woman uses sex to get ahead in life, because it's seen as a cheap way to compensate for your low qualifications. Like everyone else, black voters want help from one of their own. The Bushes made sure their people got oil money. Bill Clinton let the telecommunications industry gobble up small radio and TV stations. I don't know what that has to do with people helping their own, because Bill Clinton is not a media person. I don't like Bill Clinton, but I think that's not the correct analysis of that. I think he certainly did it in a move to appease corporations. And Donald Trump is looking out for his developer buddies through a tax cut and opportunity zones that gentrify minority neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Harris has let black people know they can't count on her. So that's it. I think it was kind of not. This kind of missed the point, but he has a few good remarks here. Okay, Kamala Harris was a draconian attorney general when she was in California. Now that she's running for president, she has to completely shift and claim that the country is basically run by racists, and she can make it better or whatever, and she will reform the criminal justice system. Well, she never did it when she was the attorney general. So people are saying, what the hell is this notion that suddenly Kamala Harris, because she's running for president, is turning a new leaf in life? So we have this issue with I watch, and I've been on the Hard Bastard show. He's on very often during the week. I think the only day he doesn't stream is Sunday, and he makes fun of Hungry Hippo, which is Simone Sanders' nickname, because she looks ridiculous, and she also behaves like in a very flamboyantly outraged manner whenever people criticize anything she says. So she's on CNN, and this is Atlanta Black Star, and they say, and if this is Atlanta's black paper, you can imagine how much people don't care anymore, because they are saying, well, Kamala Harris, she's expecting so much support from us, and even though CNN is giving her all of this cover, we're going to speak out against it. So CNN contributor Simone Sanders says she's tired of black men offering up their unsolicited opinions of California Senator Kamala Harris, and now folks are tired of her. Sanders, 29, voiced her frustrations on Twitter, this week after 90s rapper and entertainer Uncle Luke of Two Live Crew penned an op-ed criticizing Harris's prison reform record as San Francisco's district attorney and state attorney general. Luke, whose real name is Luther Campbell, argued Harris would be hard-pressed to find many blue-collar blacks, especially men, who would be willing to vote for her in the upcoming 2020 presidential election. The California Democrat officially entered the race for the White House on Martin Luther King Day, Jr. Day, promising to bring our voices together. If successful, she would be the first woman to hold the presidency and the second African American. Kamala Harris will have trouble persuading black voters to make her president in 2020, Campbell wrote in a column published Tuesday in the Miami New Times. First, the U.S. Senator from California must explain why Donald Trump has a better prison reform record than she had as the Golden State's Attorney General. Sanders, a former National Press Secretary for Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, didn't take too kindly to Campbell's critique on Harris and said she didn't see why he, or any other black man for that matter, felt obligated to give their negative opinions. Well, people are allowed to write whatever the hell they want. Hungry Hippo. So I don't really like Luke Campbell or anything that he writes, but I thought you wanted black people to give their opinions. Uncle Luke is no political mastermind or strategist, he tweeted. Why do black men keep popping up with their unsolicited opinions about Kamala Harris? I feel like doing that Paul Joseph Watson voice, but I don't have the British accent to go with it. Uncle Luke is no political mastermind or strategist. Why do black men keep popping up with their unsolicited opinions about Kamala Harris? There, I tried it. It wasn't long before social media critics called Sanders out for her comments, accusing the political analyst of weaponizing her gender to belittle the political opinions of African American men. Unsolicited? Obviously, it was solicited. It's in the paper. Journalist and show host Tim Black replied, Luke doesn't own the paper. Men can speak, Simone. I know you'd rather we didn't unless it supports your opinions. Speech is available to us all. Not just MSNBC contributors like you who weaponize gender. Now, I believe she's not with MSNBC. She gets on MSNBC, but typically I see her on CNN. He has an opinion and his political mind doesn't invalidate that, another critic chimed in. The majority of voters aren't political masterminds. One user noted that not once, Mrs. Miss Sanders, did you refute Uncle Luke Real one article. We black men see right through what is trying to be done. Kamala and those like her, you included, I guess, are in line with everyone but black men. It's not going to work. Another critic put it plainly, we will not be silenced. Black women also chimed in to note they had no plans to vote for Harris and took issues with Sanders' critique. So they quoted somebody, why do people really have no clue that Kamala Harris isn't for black people at all? It's not just black men. We are not rocking with her, but anyway, they have like a bed and an ant. I don't know. Not with her, tweeted one user. Another added, I've seen just as many black women share dissatisfaction with Kamala's track record. I know it's trendy to pick on black men right now, though. Plus, with what Luke said, where the lie at? So, I did see on... so we'll get to this video here, but there was this Twitter war going on between Simone Sanders and Cenk Uygur. So she's been accusing people of being bots. and she's been retweeting Kirsten Gillibrand. She basically retweets any big Democratic politician, you know, Stacey Abrams, Cory Booker, and she just looks like somebody who has crossed over. She's crossed over from the Democratic progressive wing to the Democratic establishment wing, and she's entirely given into the identity politics, which is one of the reasons that Bernie Sanders probably shouldn't have chosen her to begin with. Simone Sanders was a disaster in terms of outreach to people from Middle America. Okay, her only her only public that she can represent are basically grieving like racial arsonists like herself, and nothing exemplifies that than her covering for Kamala Harris last year when she basically compared ICE agents to the KKK. Now she tried to say, well, she didn't really do that, but she did.
KKK. What say the great debaters Niger Innis and Simone Sanders? Simone Sanders, too far?
You know, I think, so what we didn't play, Chris, was before that, the question of the KKK came up because Senator Harris was referring to comments that the president's nominee had made calling the Democratic Party neo-Klanist, which I'm not really sure what that is. And so without context, yes, I think folks would argue that equating the KKK to ICE is reckless and irresponsible. But frankly, that's not what Senator Harris did.
Why would we call them domestic terrorist group?
Because they tried to use fear and force to change political environment.
And what was the motivation for the use of fear and force?
It was based on race and ethnicity.
Right. Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels between
I'm talking about perception.
Officers and agents.
I'm talking about perception.
So this is where I see this is the effect that Kamala Harris and people like Simone Sanders want to have on the public when they're talking. They don't want to talk about the actual facts of the situation. They want to talk about perception. Now, there are certain points, and I've said this on videos, that perception defines reality. That's an important thing to remember. Perception defines reality, but perception doesn't define the law. Perception doesn't define the truth. Perception doesn't define, you know, the pursuit of justice. Okay, if you believe in the pursuit of justice, which isn't an easy thing to define, perception has to be put to the back, and you have to examine the evidence that's available. That's the same thing I said yesterday with Justin Fairfax, who deserves absolutely to be given the benefit of the doubt until proper investigation of the incident can be borne out. And it is the same thing that should be used here. Kamala Harris is trying to box this guy in. I think his name is Gerald Vitello, by saying, well, you're aware that you're perceived among people pursued by ICE as if you're KKK members. That is entirely her imagination, because first of all, law enforcement and the KKK are two different things. The KKK was essentially, the larger KKK was broken up through the efforts of law enforcement in the 60s and 70s, through a lot of enforcement initiatives by the federal government. Some of those actually would be considered unconstitutional if you apply the same lessons from COINTELPRO. The KKK was a target of COINTELPRO, just like a lot of radical left groups. Some radical right groups were as well.
I do not see a parallel between what is constitutionally mandated as it relates to enforcing the law.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
I see no perception.
Are you aware that there's a perception
that puts ICE in the same category as the KKK? Is that what you're asking me?
No, I'm very specific about what I'm asking you. Are you aware of a perception that the way that the discretion
I see no parallel.
I'm not finished.
I see none.
I'm not finished. I'm not finished.
So this is the Kamala Harris that you see when you have her going up in front of a camera. She wants people to look at her as this strong warrior for justice, but in reality, she's a warrior for an agenda. And the agenda is Kamala Harris. The agenda is her own power. And don't be fooled. The criticism she levels at ICE for the perception of them being like the KKK is a shield to disguise her own desire to become an all-powerful leader and basically use the law in order to further her own goals. Okay, that's what a lot of. She's not the only politician like this. There's a lot of people like that. So let's see how Sanders and Niger Innis respond
Are
to
you
that.
aware that there's a perception that ICE is administering its power in a way that is causing fear and intimidation, particularly among immigrants, and specifically among immigrants coming from Mexico and Central America? Are you aware of that perception?
I do not see a parallel between the power and the authority that ICE has to do its job and the agents and officers who do it professionally and excellently with lots of compassion.
Let's get to you on this, Niger. Is this just a question of context?
Absolutely not. What it is a perversion of history. It is Senator Kamala Harris spitting on the graves of thousands of African Americans that were terrorized by the most powerful political domestic terrorist organization in the history of our country.
How so?
It is her showing. How so?
Yeah.
Is she spitting on those graves?
Yes.
By comparing what ICE is doing in upholding the Constitution of the United States and the laws of our land and trying to pursue those who are breaking those laws versus the Klan that was actually trying to burn the Constitution, erode the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the Constitution, written for Black Americans so that they can be considered full citizens. The Klan, as an organized arm of the Democratic Party, went to reverse that.
All right. Now we've gone. Now this is a bridge too far. Let's just be.
Why
really
is it a
clear.
bridge too far?
Senator Harris is.
What did
on
I say that's
record
untrue,
saying,
Simone?
Senator Harris.
Do you believe that whether or not ICE should be abolished?
So I didn't edit that clip. That it was edited out in this one. So I don't know what was said in between the previous clip and the other one. So I'd have to go back and look. So if they said something that would complicate this, I don't know what they said.
Abolished. Is that a legit question for Democrats to be asking? In your opinion, Simone, is that really something that you guys should be considering?
You know, I think for Democrats that have come out on record that said they want ICE to be abolished, people should be asking those folks about abolishing ICE. But I think an overwhelming number of Democrats have come out and said we need to fix our broken immigration system, which needs to be a bipartisan effort. And when it comes to ICE, perhaps we need to revisit it. And currently, there are many Democrats, myself included, that believe ICE is not currently operating inside its mission. It is not fully funded. It does not have the resources and the real directives and the oversight that it needs to carry out its job properly. Let's be clear. ICE's job is not to enforce the border. That is, there's a separate entity for that.
Are you open to that suggestion, Niger? That it's not about abolishing. The last thing we need is less people keeping the border safe. But in terms of how they do their job, what their mandate is, and how it's executed, is that something you'd be open to reviewing?
I have strong libertarian instincts, and any government entity needs proper oversight, supervision, and direction. But that's not what some of the extremists in the progressive movement are doing. They are demonizing the thousands of decent ICE officers that are trying to enforce our laws, including Senator Harris with her perception comparison of the Klan to ICE. She don't run away from it, Simone. It was disgusting what she did.
I'm not running. It's on the record.
And she is spitting. I will say it again. Spitting on the memories of those who fought in the Civil War and the Civil Rights Revolution against the Klan that had terrorized black folk for over 100 years. It's disgusting.
So just so we don't
and
conflate
Kamala
history, to be
Harris
clear,
needs
the
to
Civil
apologize.
Okay, so that was an interesting segment. Now, Simone Sanders, let's not kid ourselves. She's not like a major figure in the Democratic Party, but she's a major figure in the media. And a lot of times, now I didn't see it in this video because the video was edited and I didn't see any parts where they addressed it. They talk a lot about the big switch, and there's a debate a lot of people who are partisan, Republican and Democrat, want to talk about the big switch in the Democratic and Republican platforms because they claim that the Democratic Party in the 60s and 70s abandoned Jim Crow and racism, and the people that took over those positions are the Republicans through the Southern strategy. But the Southern strategy never reinforced segregation. If that was true, how come segregationist policies in law, which is was really the aim of the civil rights movement, it was to change the laws in order to allow for more people to experience equality and basically end this racial segregation in the legal system. The Republicans never reinstated that in the South. Now, the Republican Party was responsible for a number of policies that, especially in terms of law enforcement, that did, they were basically moralistic policies that targeted drug offenders and things like that. And a lot of Black and Latino people were sent to prison for that. That is a legal issue, but drug laws being basically abolished is not necessarily the same as abolishing separate but equal facilities for Black and white people, as was done in the South. Okay, having separate drinking fountains is a problem. Having a lot of people sent to prison is a problem, but those two problems they don't have the same solution, and they don't have necessarily the same motivation. So I would say this: the biggest figure of the segregation era of the South was George Wallace, and George Wallace was a very popular governor throughout Alabama's 20th century history. He was first elected, if you can believe it, in 1963, and then he was elected again for his third term in 1983. And through it all, he also ran for president, I think, 3 or 4 times. He almost came away in 1976 with you see, these were all the states that went to George Wallace, all of the pink states in 1976. Well, yeah, these three: South Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi. So even in 1976, people talk about the big switch, but the big switch really never happened because a lot of the people who were voting for Wallace and voted for segregation, they still loved George Wallace and they still loved the Democratic Party. And up to, through the mid 80s, George Wallace was serving as a Democratic governor for Alabama. So I want people to come away with this. It doesn't matter if there was a big switch or not. The fact is that people's attitudes did change in both parties during that era, but it's not as if Republicans suddenly became segregationists and Democrats became, humanistic multiculturalists. What happened was that the younger generation of Democrats started to embrace a different ideology. You had a lot of them had grown up and become radical and radicalized during college, and they essentially grew into key positions in the party. So you essentially had it wasn't that the Democrats evolved as people. It's that the younger generation of Democrats had to a certain degree a different philosophy than the older generation. In the Republican Party, it was a different change. There was a major influx of people from the religious right, but the religious right isn't necessarily the racial right. So you do have some people in the Republican Party that were diehard racists, whether it was before the civil rights era or afterward. But the Democratic Party as a whole was the home of racists throughout the segregation era and beyond. And simply put, the institutions gradually grew out of those people, and that's what's happened. So nowadays, these wounds are happening in a different way because another new crop of people are coming up, people who despise the old Democratic Party, the Labor Democrats, the people who are essentially like I would say like the Walter Mondales and the Bill Clintons, or they want basically to embrace a new identity politics, the identity politics of minority communities. And in my opinion, that will taint the reputation of the Democratic Party for a while. You are going to have people like Howard Schultz breaking away and saying, look, that's not really the type of image that we wanted to promote as growing up and living in this country. We're going to move over to the center and build kind of a home for people who don't necessarily want to have a divisive political message. Okay, does that mean Howard Schultz is right on the issues? I don't think so, but I think he's speaking to a number of people who are disaffected by the Democratic Party but don't believe in the Republican Party, and he could be a walk-away candidate. Let's think about it that way. There's a number of people who are so disaffected by what's going on in the Democratic Party, they might vote for, don't discount this, Donald Trump. And there are also some people who are so disaffected by the process of the Democrats, the cheating during the 2016 election in order to screw Bernie Sanders over. And by the way, I don't understand why Simone Sanders isn't supporting Bernie Sanders yet, and instead basically caping for Kamala Harris. But essentially, there's a lot of people on the left who want to leave and form their own left-wing party to replace the Democrats. There's the Union for the Populist Movement, I think they call them, or the Union for the People's Party. So they are trying to draft Bernie Sanders or another candidate in order to challenge the Democrats in 2020. So that's basically the civil war that's going on in the Democratic Party right now. You have people who are radical left. Okay, those people what might break away and form their own party, just like Jill Stein did. Okay, Jill Stein technically never broke away because she was always Green Party. Then you have the corporate Democrats. People like now Simone Sanders is a corporate Democrat. She's fronting for someone like Kamala Harris, who is definitely not, I repeat, not a progressive given her criminal justice policies. Okay, she might say a lot of nice things, but if you are a progressive, which I'm not, and you examine her policies, you're likely very disappointed. Then you have some people who feel the Democratic Party they've moved in a radical direction, and they might be moving to somebody like Howard Schultz. And some people will laugh and say, no, Howard Schultz isn't going to get any votes. Trust me, once he creates a backlash, the backlash will create its own backlash. And Howard Schultz will have a number of people vote for him. And that's my summary of the civil war engulfing the Democratic Party due to the toxic cocktail of radical left politics and identity politics. That's about it. Please like the video, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to the channel on BitChute and CocoScope. BitChute really is good with notifications. And also, please share the video and find me on this other social media behind me.